In this lesson, we are going to learn how to install MySQL. So far, we have the client working with the server. Now the server is storing its data in memory. If we go to server.js, lines 10 through 23 define an array of objects. Now this data stays in memory as long as the server is run. When the server is shut down and restarted, all that data is gone, because every time the server starts, it starts with entries anew because of this hard-coded value here. That is not a good way to store data at all, because everything we type, everything we put in there is not persisted. It gets lost. So enter the database. We are going to use an SQL database called MySQL or MySQL. So we are going to store the data in that database. That we're going to have a database. That database has many tables. For our case, we're going to have one table to store the entries. That will be the entries table. The entries table will have some columns. Since we already defined the representation of the data in this manner here, in this object, it's easy to translate that into a database column. Simply take the keys from the object and make that a column. So we'll have the ID as one column. This column will be the primary key. The second one will be the text. Okay. Now let's go to the MySQL website. This is the website for MySQL. There are many ways to install MySQL, depending on your system, depending whether you want to use a package manager. Okay, so here are some ways you can do to install MySQL. If you're a Windows user, you can simply download the installer from MySQL's dev.mysql.com website. For example, if you go to the website, you can click Developer Zone. It goes to dev.mysql.com. You can go to MySQL Downloads, and here have the option MySQL Installer for Windows. This is the Community Edition. You can see this is version 8.0.21, and you can get the MSI here. If you're using macOS, there's also an installer. Here's a link I put for version 5.7. It's still a stable version, even though not the latest. And that's the PKG. If you want, you can also go to the same website. Let's go back one. And there might be somewhere here for Mac. We just gotta look. I think it's Community Server. And I claim select the operating system, Mac OS. And there's a DMG archive, for example. Now the way is using Brew. If you have Brew, package manager for iOS, for Mac OS, you can do Brew install MySQL. For my case, I'm using Linux. The distribution is Ubuntu. I can use my own package manager instead of downloading from the website, although you can also do that. You can go back and there's an apt here. Now for other distributions like Fedora, there's Yum, and there's SUSE and so on. Anyway, I'm gonna do my case using apt. apt is built on top of apt-get. You can also do apt-get, doesn't matter. So very simple, just update the repository index and install the MySQL Server package. And if you want to do the secure installation to disable certain features that are by default to make it more secure, we can do this one. And finally, we can use the client, right? Because we have the database server, the MySQL server, and we need a way to access the database. And that's through the MySQL client that we get. That's the command MySQL. Of course, you can use utilities like the MySQL Workbench. That's a GUI you can use. I recommend that too. Up to you. Anyway, let's get started here. I'm going to use the command line. I'm going to do sudo to get privilege apt update. So apt is the package manager for Ubuntu. Let's update repository index list. Might take some time. Then we can do sudo apt install MySQL-server. Now it usually asks if you want to go on. I said yes before because I already installed, and I'm doing it again. So this is installing version 5.7 for me. I'm using Ubuntu 18.04 long-term support, so the package manager recommends I use that version. Of course, you can always find out if there are packages for the newer versions, depending on what version of your distribution you're using. So with that, let's try MySQL -s version. This should give us the version of the client. You can do sudo service. Let's see, maybe I think MySQL's status. And we can see it's running MySQL community server. Exact is here and so on, the D. Anyway, Control C. I think some of the, for my case, some of the configurations under etc/MySQL. And there's some files there, MySQL conf d, MySQL cnf, so on. Just so you know. Before I do a secure installation, I just want to check if it's working. So sudo MySQL, it's going to connect us to the database server. We got it here, show databases. And we got everything fine. Let me exit. We can do the optional MySQL secure installation to make things more secure. That's up to you. There are certain questions that will be asked, and it's up to you to choose to adopt them or not. Let me try MySQL secure installation. So the first one, let's see, connecting to MySQL using a blank password. I think I already installed this, so I didn't ask. So there's something about the validate password plugin. You can choose to have it or not. Connected to MySQL with a blank password. Validate is installed because I already did. But if you didn't have it, it'll probably ask you for that. The subsequent steps to run existing configuration. Set a password for root here. You can set a password for root if you want. Of course, that's a recommended setting for production. Length of the password and so on. It's probably going to ask you about the password strength also. I already did that before. And of course, you want to choose the strongest for your production one. Since we're doing educational here, I'm trying to be a little less, but always go for the strongest one. Better strength and so on. Do you wish to continue? Yeah. Okay, so by default, the MySQL installation has an anonymous user, allowing anyone to log into MySQL without having to have a user account created for them. This is intended only for testing. To make the installation go a bit smoother, you should remove them before moving into production environments. So make sure to do that as you go into production. I'm going to remove it. I don't care. Normally, root should only be allowed to connect from localhost. This ensures someone cannot guess at the root password for the network. Disallow root logging remotely. If you want that, I'm going to say yes. There's also the test database. I want to remove it and remove the access. Okay. Reload privilege table now. Yes. Okay, all done. So I can do sudo MySQL and it should be working fine. Mind you that when I do sudo, I'm running the command as root, so it's working. Okay, so that's it. I installed MySQL and I can connect using the client. Now we can start hooking our back end to connect to MySQL database server and then we can start doing some queries to insert data. And we're going to create the table, and then we're going to do some queries to insert data, and so on. See you in the next one.